force. The fact that we've seen obstruction from the government and not urgency to address this incredibly serious matter that undermines Canadians' confidence in public institutions. It creates incredible stress for families who are struggling to get by, to see the laissez-faire attitude of a government who's willing to dole out millions to the elites. Well, the beating heart and soul of this country, the everyday Canadian, is struggling just to make ends meet. And of course, to add insult to injury, we're just weeks away from a double-digit, 23% increase to the Liberal carbon tax that will see an increase in the price of gas, groceries, and home heating. Now, the rotten waste in this government does go beyond the $60 million Arrive scam. We know that. We know that the system of procurement that they're overseeing is broken. And we know that this is just one of a long list of scandals presided over by a Prime Minister twice found guilty for breaking Canada's ethics laws. But today, we are faced with, as a House, as representatives of Canadians, the opportunity to send a crystal clear message that when the grand inquest of the nation, when Canada's Parliament summons you before a committee, when Canada's Parliament invites you before a committee, we must get the full truth and nothing but the truth.
Help us God.
So we're going to defend Canada's institutions. We're going to restore that confidence that Canadians have. And Speaker, this motion offers an appropriate remedy for the rules having been broken, an admonishment, and for accountability and transparency, answers to the questions that were rightfully put to the individual who will, if this motion passes, be brought before the bar of this House. Now, Speaker, I invite all members of the House to support this important motion. I know that we've heard affirmation from members of Canada's official opposition, the Common Sense Conservatives. I know that we've heard from members of the second and from the third and the fourth party, as well as from the Green Party, that they'll be supporting it. And I look with hopeful optimism that today, after 8 years, this Liberal government will do the right thing and vote in support of restoring Canadians' confidence in its oldest institution, its most sacred institution, the place that we serve, the true north, strong and free, our country that we love, Canada, and that's why we're voting to restore that confidence, and I call on all members to do the same. Thank you very much, Speaker.
Well said.
Questions et commentaires. L'honorable.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Drummond. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague, my Conservative colleague, for his speech. There's something very scandalous about this whole affair. First of all, a company that's double-dipping into the public trough without any restraint and no remorse either. And once called to explain before the committee, that it's incredible the arrogance that was shown in refusing to answer. I know that committees have some tools to convince and even force reluctant witnesses to answer, but there are some, like the one we're talking about today, Mr. Firth, who managed to resist even those tools. So I think we need greater authority to make sure that this kind of recalcitrance ends. We've seen this at a couple of committees, witnesses refusing to answer questions. Are committees going to be strong enough? Are they going to have stronger tools so that we don't have this happening over and over again? So that witnesses understand that they have to answer questions.
The honourable member from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
Well, I thank my honourable colleague for the question. The tools that we have today allow for a range of steps, and the first step, the one that's taken, every day a committee's in session in this House, is that we invite people to come to committee, whether it's stakeholders or people who are the subject of the report, who played a part in government contracting like this. Then the rare occasion where we have individuals who decline and may have different reasons for declining, but they decline. The committee can insist on that and, of course, issue a summons. And exceedingly rare, of course, we have to use the power of the full House, where all members have to agree to send for those individuals, which was done in this case. The tools are there, and I think that the power of committees, the important work that we do, will be reinforced should this motion come to pass, because it sends an incredibly strong message about the seriousness with which all members take this matter and all matters that this House lawfully takes up in committee.
The honourable member from Nepean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is an extraordinary situation. Parliament reflects the will of the people, will of all Canadians, and parliamentarians as representatives of the people, we do have the right and the duty to seek the truth. We cannot allow anyone to go scot-free. Those who disregard, disobey, disrespects, and misleads or lies to the Parliament or the parliamentary bodies. I would like to ask the member whether he is satisfied with the current process or the current mechanics, the rules and regulations that are in place that we can use to go after the Canadian, the individuals who disrespect the Parliament, or if he is not satisfied, are there any changes to the current process or the current tools or the current rules he would like to propose?
The honourable member from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
Well, Speaker, thank the honourable member for the question. Again, it's a question of Parliament refreshing and parliamentarians refreshing their comfort in using the tools that are available to them, and this being an important one. Having individuals swear an oath before they come before committee has the same effect as an individual swearing an oath in a court of law. And for perjury, members of the public would have an understanding, even through pop culture, on what the prospective penalties are for that offense. And so when we have individuals who are just flatly refusing to attend or refusing to answer questions, we need to use the tools that are in our parliamentary toolbox today. And this tool is it's rarely used, because it seems like it's been some time since anyone felt like they had greater power than Canada's 338 elected representatives, and that's why I think it's so important that we offer the appropriate remedy in this case, and that is to get the answers for Canadians and to admonish the individual who flouted the rules.
The honourable member from Barrie Innisfil.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the honourable member for bringing this issue forward, and I think it is an important one for this House to debate. Like all Canadians, I've been watching what's been going on with the proceedings at the Government Operations Committee, and have been extremely disturbed by the lack of work or the lack of information that's being provided by this individual. But I want to speak, and I know the honourable member is involved in several committees, not the least of which is Government Operations, but I want to speak specifically, because we are talking about obstruction, the obstructive tactics that have been going on in committee by the NDP Liberal coalition, whether it's filibustering, whether it's amendments to motion to water things down, or just generally obstructing the ability of the committee to do its work, especially on those committees where they have the majority.
The honourable member from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau Lakes.
Making sure that the will of Canadians is reflected in the work that we do requires incredible fortitude. Frankly, this is what we've had to put forward as the official opposition. We have to be able to withstand the tactics of a government that's found themselves after 8 years mired in scandal, and it's quite plain that they're just not worth the corruption to Canadians anymore. And pressing forward with an issue like this, though it's difficult and though it might seem uncomfortable to some and might say, okay, well, let's send this off to another committee to take a look at it. Well, frankly, this has been dealt with at committee. The only thing another committee could do is confirm, yep, there was prevarication, there were lies, there was a refusal to answer questions. So that's why it's so important that the House has that, is prepared to persevere, to stick to it, and to get these answers and to resolve the situation.
The buck stops there.
The honourable member, l'honorable député de New Westminster, Burnaby.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like you to stick to the normal rotation, which, as you know, is that after the motion was introduced, the three other parties. So I would ask that you continue that tradition there. Mr. Speaker, clearly this motion, especially when it comes to ordering Mr. Firth to appear before the bar in the House and to be reprimanded and to provide answers to the questions that were raised. In the 17th report, we fully support that part of the motion.
The member from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Island, and Rideau Lakes for both his point of privilege, which I thought was solidly grounded in the traditions of the House that he presented. I thought it was very effective. And the reality is, Mr. Speaker, we intervened at the time to say we believe the conditions were there for a prima facie question of privilege because of the lack of respect for the House. Your ruling, I think, confirms that. And we are now seized with the debate. It's a motion that allows for that ability for this House to reprimand Mr. Firth and to call him to the bar and ensure that Canadians receive answers. We've seen with the ETS scandal and the Conservative government, $400 million. Now with this scandal under this current government, $60 million, that we need to ensure these things never happen again. And would my colleague agree with the NDP that this is not the kind of thing that any Canadian should be tolerating?
The honourable member from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, Rideau Lakes.
Well, of course, it's devastating for all Canadians to see the waste scandal and mismanagement after 8 years of this NDP Liberal Prime Minister. And it's so important that parliamentarians recognize the incredible opportunity that we have here right now to support this important motion, so that anyone else who's out there who's thinking about engaging in some kind of corrupt practices and cozying up with with insiders, with cozying up to people who aren't forthright, and thinking that they're going to take the taxpayer for a ride. They need to understand that that's unacceptable. And first of all, Canada's Conservatives will of course restore ethics and accountability to Ottawa. But anyone who comes before a parliamentary committee must tell the truth. They must give fulsome answers. And if they fail to do that, there will be real consequences. And Canadians are still going to get answers because Canada's Conservatives will insist on nothing less. Exactly.
Resuming debate, the honourable member from Kingston and the Islands.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I rise today to speak to this debate on this question of privilege and the motion that's been put forward by the member from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, Rideau Lakes. And I want to thank him for bringing this forward. I would agree that this is an extremely serious matter. What we've seen in committee occur with the individuals in question being asked to appear committee, being summoned to appear before committee, being completely ignoring those requests and demands, and then finally appearing after the threat of arrest is not the conduct in which I think that any member of parliament or any Canadian citizen should expect in order for our democracy to function properly. The committees that exist that support the work in the House of Commons here that perhaps a lot of Canadians aren't completely familiar with are committees that do very important work to inform the House, to bring forward various different proposals and policy and positions from the committee members after having the opportunity to sit down and to hear from actual witnesses at the ground level. And that's why getting this information to committee in a timely, cooperative, and very important, and most importantly, truthful manner is of critical importance. When we have people that arbitrarily decide they don't think they need to tell the truth, or they don't think they need to appear because they don't feel like it or they don't want to, when we're talking about something as serious as this, when we're talking about how public money was misused by individuals, perhaps in a fraudulent manner, then we have a big problem. And so I would agree with the member from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau Lakes when he speaks very passionately about the need to get this information and to properly deal with the individuals in question here. Because if we don't, Mr. Speaker, if we don't ensure that we're properly doing that, we are basically setting a precedent and opening the door to others who might feel the same way, as though they don't want to, or they don't feel obligated to appear before committee when they're summoned, or to tell the truth, or to provide information in order for parliamentarians vis-a-vis their constituents and the Canadian population to get to the bottom of things. And so when we look at the ArriveCAN situation specifically, I think I would like to point out a few things where I perhaps disagree with my colleague who introduced the motion. Namely, the fact that the government of Canada has been seized with this issue since it was brought forward by CBSA and the officials to the minister. Since as soon as the minister was made aware of this, he directed the appropriate individuals to conduct audits and to figure out exactly what was going on. To suggest that that wasn't the case would be void of reality of what actually happened. And so once it was discovered that there was work that needed to be done in terms of getting to the bottom of things and figuring out exactly what happened, the minister and his officials proceeded to ensure that that would happen. And as we know, as a result of that, a number, or at least 3 contracts were suspended by CBSA, and those were contracts specifically with GC Strategies, Cordix Technology, and Dalian Enterprises. And it's extremely, I think, very prudent, the manner in which that was dealt with, and it's the proper way to conduct this. I will say, Mr. Speaker, my concern is, and I'm open to hearing the debate and hearing what people have to say today. My concern about the manner in which the member has brought this forward is how we conduct this operation exactly. He wants to call them to the individuals to the bar, and I don't know if this means we dissolve into committee of the whole or something in order to ask questions. This, quite frankly, isn't something, Mr. Speaker, that has been done in over 200 years. We really don't have a practice or a proper procedure for doing this. This is why when I intervened on the point of privilege earlier today, Mr. Speaker, I specifically talked about the fact that we need to establish how we do this. Like, what does this look like from a practical implementing perspective? Because I was unfortunate to be one of the participants during the middle of the pandemic when we were in this House. I may have been the only Liberal member that was physically present in the House of Commons when we called another individual to the bar. And all that we really got out of that, Mr. Speaker, was people yelling and shouting and screaming from their seats while the individual stood there and was scolded and chastised. I assume that, and I have faith in the member from Leeds, Granville, Thousand Islands, Rideau Lakes, when he genuinely wants to get to the bottom of this, and this is not about political theater as that tended to be. So that's why I stress upon the fact that it is extremely important that we just develop how we will go about conducting the manner in which we call somebody and how questions are asked and how this House will genuinely function during that time, again, given the fact that this is not something that we have done in over 200 years. So that does bring concern for me, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I would like to move an amendment to the motion. I have the amendment here, which I will provide to the clerk after I read it out. It is seconded by the member from Milton, and that the motion be amended by A, deleting the words "at the expiry of the time provided for oral questions on the third sitting day following the adoption of this order," and B, adding at the end, quote, "provided that D, it be the instruction of the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs to study the procedure for questioning Kirsten Firth at the bar of the House and report back to the House of Commons with recommendations within 10 days following the adoption of this order, and that Kirsten Firth, Kirsten Firth attend the bar of the House of Commons no later than 3 sitting days following the concurrence in of the report." So what I'm asking for here, in addition to what I'm asking for here, Mr. Speaker, is that we let the Standing Committee very quickly develop the procedure by which we would entertain the individual and proceed with the individual once they get here, and then also adding the words to ensure that the appearance occur within a limited number of time, 3 days, as I indicated. That's my amendment, Mr. Speaker, and I will submit that to the clerk. We're going to need a second.
So if the House will give the chair a couple of moments just to consider this, it appears to be in order, and I just need an opportunity to verify this. Mr. Gerritsen, seconded by Mr. Van Koeverden, moves the following motion. A, that the motion be amended by A, deleting the words "at the expiry of the time provided for oral questions on the third sitting day following the adoption of this order," and B, at the end, adding at the end, "provided that D, it be an instruction to the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs to study the procedure for questioning Christian Firth at the bar of the House and report back to the House with recommendations within 10 sitting days following the adoption of this order, and E, Christian Firth attend the bar of the House no later than 3 sitting days following concurrence of the report. Alors, Monsieur Gerritsen.
Mr. Gerritsen, seconded by Mr. Vancouverden, moves the following motion, that the motion be clarified by A, adding at the end of question period on the 3rd sitting day following the adoption of this order, B, by adding the following, provided that D, an instruction be given to the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs to undertake a study of the procedure regarding the questioning of Christian Firth, and that the committee report to the House within 10 days of the adoption of this order, and that Christian Firth appear at the bar of the House within 3 days of the adoption of the report.
Resuming debate. Questions and comments. The honourable member from New Westminster, Burnaby.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I hope that this signifies that we will have a consensus around the important consideration of ensuring that the contempt that was shown by Mr. Firth through this House, through the committee report, and through the question privilege that we're now debating, that those questions that Mr. Firth refused to answer will be answered. And it appears that we're getting to a consensus around that fact. I think that is important because that is fundamental, I think, to the process and ensuring that we get answers for Canadians and accountability from this government. Where there seems to be an issue to work through is the procedure around that. And I think that we will certainly take into consideration the amendment. But as far as the NDP is concerned, what is absolutely vital is that the admonishment be delivered to Mr. Firth and that we have in place a method to get all of the answers that Canadians are demanding. This is fundamental because this has gone on now for 20 years. We've seen procurement scandals, the ETS scandal under the former Harper government. Now we have the ArriveCan scandal that is under the current government, and $59.5 million that was clearly misspent, 19.1 million of it that is connected to GC strategies. Would my colleague from Kingston and the Islands agree with the NDP that we need to stop these scandals, whether Conservative or Liberal? We need to put in place measures to ensure this kind of scandal, this kind of misspending never happens again.
The honourable member from Kingston and the Islands.
First and foremost, Mr. Speaker, we need to ensure that taxpayers' money, they're getting what they deserve, and that they're being treated fairly in terms of money that's being spent on behalf of taxpayers. And to that end, whenever an issue arises through government that, like we've seen with ArriveCan, we need to get to the bottom of it on behalf of taxpayers. And so to that end, I am definitely supportive of what the member from New Westminster, Burnaby, is indicating. But I do just want to stress that the reason why I put forward that amendment is because of my concern as to what we will actually get out of the process of having the individual here. That's why I stress that rather than having a debacle and everybody, perhaps not really knowing what the procedure and how we're going to deal with this, because we haven't done it in over 200 years, that we lay that out clearly and it is set up so that we have a process in place to do that, and that's what my amendment is about.
The honourable member from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, Rideau Lakes.
Speaker, so the last time this was done was 1913, which is certainly not 200 years ago. I'd just like to draw through you to the member for Kingston and the Islands attention, Sir John Bournois' Parliamentary Procedure and Practice in the Dominion of Canada, 4th edition, at pages 70 and 74, which explain that when the witness appears at the bar of the House, each question will be written out and handed to the Speaker, who, strictly speaking, should read it to the witness. But on certain occasions, a considerable degree of latitude is allowed for the convenience of the House, and questions put directly by members have been supposed to be put through the Speaker. Speaker, the precision with which this is done has already been laid out, not in ancient texts, but in the texts of precedents that are relevant to this place. A further committee study, further delay is not what we need. Of course, order and decorum will be maintained. That is the role of the Speaker of this House, and of course, like institutions, all institutions in Canada, Canadians have confidence that the Speaker would do it in just that way, a way where decorum is maintained, but that we do get answers and admonishment, and that it's done in very due course, Speaker. Thank you.
The honourable member from Kingston and the Islands.
111 years, I apologize. I said 200. It doesn't change the fact that it was certainly before that member or I were born. It was before the two great world wars. It was before the Titanic sank, Mr. Speaker. It was a long time ago. And I think that it warrants us at least studying to make sure that the manner in which you do this is acceptable. Something that unfortunately didn't happen 111 years ago, Mr. Speaker, was the last time that we called somebody before the bar. And I was in this House when that member was in this House, and despite the fact that he has great assurances in the Speaker to do their job in terms of maintaining decorum, it was Conservatives that were outright, in my opinion, ruthless towards the way that they treated the President of PSAC when he came before the bar. We have a precedent of less than 2 years ago of how Conservatives treated somebody that comes before the bar. I have a lot of respect for the member from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, Rideau Lakes. I do not agree with him that decorum just happens. We know for a fact that did not happen last time we did this. So I think it would be very prudent of us to take, what am I talking about here, 10 days to work with his colleagues who sit on the committee to determine and establish the practice that we use when the individual arrives.
The honourable member for Laurentides-Labelle. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I feel like I'm in an old-fashioned movie. When it comes to procedure, there have already been many questions of privilege. Mr. Speaker, what's happening at the PROC committee, we can't determine the result of it, but for such an important file or case, we have to deal with it here in the chamber. So, Mr. Speaker, I would like to discuss this here, and PROC won't have the last word. So I understand my colleague across the way who's trying to save time and open a door so that PROC can make some amendments. But, Mr. Speaker, I believe that we have to deal with this here in the House.
The honourable member from Kingston and the Islands.
That's not what I was proposing. That's not what I'm proposing, Mr. Speaker. What I'm proposing in the amendment is not that PROC change anything or change the wording or anything like that. We can pass that privilege motion with my amendment here. All it says is that before the individual appear before the bar, we allow PROC to establish the manner in which the individual is questioned, whether we're in committee of the whole or regular proceeding. And I realize that the member from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, Rideau Lakes brought forward some suggestions as to how it happened in 1913. And by the way, the Titanic sunk in 1911, so I shouldn't have made that reference. But the truth is we're just talking. I'm just talking about how. Let PROC establish how that individual is treated when they come here. I'm by no means suggesting that the individual doesn't come here.
The honourable member from Milton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to commend the member for all of the work he's done on this file. It's extremely important to make sure that all of the work that we do in this place continues to have integrity. And I know that's a mutual commitment that all parties share, and this solutions to this challenge have required a multi-partisan approach. Despite all the theatrics in the House and the finger-pointing and the name-calling and everything, this actually has been a very collaborative approach. And I was hoping that the member could speak to the collaborative nature of his amendment and what's necessary to get us to a place where this House can continue the work that we're doing with integrity. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Kingston and the Islands.
And that's what I really genuinely hope that we can get out of this, Mr. Speaker, is our answers on behalf of Canadians. Not political theatre, not dragging somebody there just for the purpose of showing it so that, you know, there can be a nightly clip that shows another individual being brought before the bar in such a manner, but so that we can actually get the answers to the questions that were not provided in committee, and to the member from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, Real Lakes, to his point, to show Canadians that there is an obligation when people are summoned to committee to come and to provide the truth, and if they don't, there is recourse to that. So I don't disagree with the manner in which the members put it forward. I just want to make sure that our objective here is going to be to get to the bottom of this issue and that we have the right tools in place to do it. I genuinely think that this is the correct way. This is the way that Canadians would expect us to do it, and it's the responsible way that provides the proper due diligence.
We have time for one last very brief question, about 20 seconds long. The honourable member from Central Okanagan, Similkameen Nicola, has only 20 seconds for a
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And to the member opposite, I totally disagree with the categorization that he made of when we had the president of PHAC here. I was here, other members as well. And it was untrue that it was not done in a proper format. Mr. Speaker, Parliament is a place where we need to be respected as an institution. I believe we should be able to get answers. I want to ask the member, does he believe firmly we should get answers in the most direct way possible, or is he creating more process?
The honourable member from Kingston and the Islands.
Parliament is also a place, Mr. Speaker, where we ensure that things are done in a proper and a manner in order to ensure that the right answers are received for Canadians. And to his point, I absolutely, and I actually really hope that we can remove the partisanship out of this and we can work to getting those answers, because to his last point, I most definitely want to get the answers to it. But more importantly, I think Canadians deserve to get the answers to these questions.
Before we resume debate, I have the honour to inform the House that messages have been received from the Senate informing the House that the Senate has passed the following bills. C-34.
C-34, Act to amend Canada Act. C-67, Act for Public Administration Credit for fiscal year ending March 31st, 2024.
For granting to His Majesty certain sums of money for the federal public administration for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2025.
Resuming debate, the Honourable Member for Terrebonne. Far be it from me to want to defend the Canadian Parliament, because I would like Quebec to no longer be part of it one day, but I'd like to defend the principle that this Parliament does defend, the respect for democratic institutions, which Quebec does participate in for the time being. We're facing another scandal with ArriveCan. This app, which was supposed to cost $8 million, and we're not even sure of the amount, but it's probably around $60 million. In fact, the Auditor General issued a report about the management of ArriveCan, and she said that this is the worst management of an app she's seen in her career, and we've discovered that the ArriveCan file is only the tip of the iceberg. Every time we lift up something, we discover something new underneath it. And we've realized that there are personnel from CBSA that participated in activities with some suppliers, like we're talking about today in this question of privilege, were invited to. The average cost for management was $1,080, whereas the average cost for a position was around $675. There are many components, Mr. Speaker, a lot of things that are shocking when we're gradually discovering new information that comes out. And in fact, the person we're talking about today, Mr. Firth, justified his rate of $2,600 a day, that he's saying that he doesn't do a 9-to-5 job. They do not provide any services or products to the government, yet Mr. Firth himself said that he presented more than 1,500 bills a month, and that the cost suddenly rose for this contract to $13.5 million of taxpayers' money. The controller at Public Accounts, where I sit, recently revealed that GC Strategies, founded by Mr. Firth and its predecessor, Consulting, obtained roughly $108 million in contracts since 2011. And we recently learned that some manual searches allowed the government to find other contracts. So this leads us to believe that there may be more than $108 million in contracts in total. La Presse recorded this figure and many others. And this is a big deal. The fact that we're not able to know exactly how many people that have no respect for Canada's democratic institutions and those of Quebec, how much they earn, how much these people receive from the government. The government can't even tell us. According to Christian Firth, once again, at OGO, $21% was their margin that they pocketed for contracts. Well, if we consider that there's $108 million in contracts, this is divided by 2. Darren Anthony, Mr. Firth, 21% of $108 million. Well, it's roughly $23 million. That's an enormous amount. $23 million, and they provided no service. If that's not poor management of public funds, what is it? And these individuals, they saw a breach, and they have no respect for taxpayer money, and they showed at several occasions at committee that they have no respect for Canadian parliamentary institutions that represent both Canadians and Quebecers. The same individuals were given contracts under the Liberals and the Conservatives under another name, Corridal. Corridal was founded roughly 10 years previous, and it was bought by Christian Firth and Darren Anthony, and they changed the names to GC Strategy in 2015 when the government changed. GC Strategies and Corridal have the same owner, therefore, with the exception of Caleb White, who withdrew. For what reason, we don't know. GC Strategies received most of its contracts from CBSA for Arrive Cam. We learned this in the Auditor General's report, that many of these contracts were not awarded through competition. Recently, through access to some emails, we learned that PSPC red flagged this. And despite the pandemic, they said this is somewhat strange that we're giving contracts of several $1 million over 3 years, even though what you're saying to justify a non-competitive contract is the fact that we have to take urgent action. Why are they rushing and offering a 3-year contract? There's something that doesn't make sense. And despite the warnings put forth by PSPC, pushed by some individuals within the agency, decided to give these contracts with the signature of PSPC. So, unfortunately, these people were supposed to work to make sure these things don't happen. People like Christian Firth should not wrongly benefit from public funds. Another factor that I'd like to bring to this House is that Mr. Firth owns a numbered company, which also rings a bell, a strange bell, because sometimes it makes you think that this whole story may be a bit dirty. Mr. First and Mr. Anthony met each other in 2010 when they were working for Veritac. Mr. Speaker, these two individuals left Veritac in 2010, and in 2009, the same firm and the same owners of this firm pled guilty to an offer to a scandal involving bids, and they worked at Veritac when Veritac was accused of this scandal, and the judge asked for Veritac's employees to all receive, including Mr. Firth and Darren Anthony, training on bid fixing, so he knew full well what he was doing when they themselves wrote the bid that allowed GC Strategies to win a contract for several $1 million for ArriveCan. They knew full well what they were doing, these two individuals. Mr. First and Mr. Anthony, through the work of the Auditor General, we learned that they were involved in golf tournaments and whiskey events and many others. They participated in various activities. And the excuse that we had to take urgent action was put forth by many companies to justify ArriveCan. We have tight deadlines, they said, but the number of non-competitive contracts had risen significantly since 2016, between 2016 and 2023, even after the pandemic. So this is being studied at several committees even. And it's in this context that the owners of GC Strategy were called to the OGO committee. At public accounts, we heard from the CEO of the other company that is in a very similar situation, namely Dalian, the CEO of that company. And unfortunately, it's not today's topic, but I realize that this person also committed a breach of Parliament or is in contempt of Parliament by not answering question because they gave contradicting answers from A to Z. And my Liberal colleagues were happy to see that these individuals managed to bring all of Parliament on the same page in terms of, well, we all agreed that these individuals clearly lacked respect for our institutions. So therefore, we understand that it's in terms of contempt of Parliament that the question of privilege was sought. And, Mr. Speaker, contempt of Parliament is any act or omission with respect to the authority or the dignity of Parliament. And the question of privilege raised by the member for Leeds, Grenville Islands, Rideau Lakes is therefore relevant. Yes, Christian Firth did finally accept to go back to committee after asking him several times, even under threat from the Sergeant of Arms to forcefully bring him back. And he made a statement. A series of questions from committee members were asked about his participation in ArriveCan. And during his testimony, Mr. Firth refused on several occasions to answer committee questions under the pretext that there was an RCMP investigation underway. And I'd like to mention that the CEO of the other company, Mr. Yeo, said that the RCMP never contacted him. So who's telling the truth? There is a person in the same investigation of the scam with signatures for consent. And there's one CEO, Mr. Firth, who refuses to answer questions from our committee using the pretext that the RCMP investigation is underway, and the other CEO who says at committee that the RCMP never contacted them. So once again, who's telling the truth? There's probably several cases of contempt of Parliament to be raised, but let's talk about what happened at committee that day. Some testimony from Mr. Firth was suspected to be misleading. Mr. Firth said he made mistakes in terms of talking about a chalet or a cottage, but quite frankly, who makes a mistake when they talk about a country house or a chalet or a cottage? To answer with a smile is actually insulting for committee members who are trying to get answers for legitimate questions about where taxpayers' money went and how it was used. The committee also mentioned in terms of fully sworn-in witnesses, because Mr. Firth was sworn in, and whether the witness is sworn in or not, if they refuse to answer questions or do not give true answers, could be accused of contempt of the House. And you know what? That's what they did. Mr. Firth refused to answer questions on several occasions, questions from committee members. Therefore, because Mr. Firth refused to answer these questions, and also in terms of the truthfulness of his answers, they adopted a motion for the question of privilege. The Bloc obviously supported this question of privilege. We were at committee, we asked questions to Mr. Firth, and we realized that, in fact, there was a contempt of Parliament. So I do appreciate your decision, Mr. Speaker, because we do agree with this decision. We agree with the motion that was moved today. In terms of the amendment, there are several aspects to consider. First, like my colleague said, the member for Lanty-Labelle, PROC, unfortunately, acts in a very partisan fashion and may cause delays. Because this is inevitable, because the House of Commons, it's up to us to decide if a person who committed contempt of Parliament needs to attend the bar and answer questions from members. So we need to do the bare minimum when you respect democratic institutions, namely to answer questions from committee members. Because these questions, Mr. Speaker, let's remember, members represent the people, Canadians. These are questions we receive every day. Everyone's talking about the Arrive-Can affair, not just here, where we don't live in a bubble. This affair concerns everyone because, yes, people right now are having a hard time finding housing. They're having a hard time buying food. And all the while, we realize that there are companies that receive dozens of millions of dollars of taxpayers' money that don't provide any services and don't even take their responsibilities seriously. They don't take any responsibility for this affair. They answer questions with a smile when they do even answer them. And this is deeply insulting, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, in terms of bringing the questions to PROC, well, we're still reflecting because we have to understand that this House has the power to decide in terms of what will happen to these individuals. And first, we'd like to make sure that everyone in this chamber agrees that there was contempt of Parliament and that these individuals, particularly Mr. Firth and Mr. Anthony and Mr. Yeo, have to answer the questions of parliamentarians, of Quebecers and Canadians, that everyone has to agree that they should attend the bar here and wait for your judgment in terms of their actions, Mr. Speaker. These actions that are deplorable. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Chateauguay-Lacolle. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for her speech. She summarized rather well, with a lot of details, what happened at public accounts and at OGO as well, because we see that there were several committees involved in this affair, and I do appreciate as well the fact that my colleague recognizes that there are ways of doing things here in the Parliament, and the procedures have to be respected. And I don't think she would like to see things like we saw in the 43rd Parliament, when someone from the public service was called here and chaos broke out here in the chamber. We don't want to see this type of procedure because it doesn't yield the answers that we need. She said the bloc was thinking about things, so I'd like to know a little bit more about what's important for them in their reflection. The honourable member for Terrebonne. Of course, decorum, yes, I agree with my colleague. Decorum is important, but decorum is important for both ways. When someone has showed such a lack of respect for committee members and they have no respect for democratic institutions, as I said several times in my speech, the person needs to be brought before the bar. So we need to know